I think as an artist, I'm someone that questions a lot. I question systems, be it political or musical. I question dogmas by lending ideas and paradigms and materials from different practices. So I grew up with popular music, then I had a whole deep dive into classical music and contemporary music, into electronic music. I also grew up with a lot of jazz, a lot of metal. It's a lot of different approaches to making music, and I think what defines me as an artist is that I am kind of finding my own way with those different languages and have, well, created my personal language with all of those different influences. I think there's two moments that stayed with me as like significant moments in relation to the arts. And one of them is when I went to the Yugoslavian school in Amsterdam, and I did folklore dancing. And there was something between the motion and the motion in music and the motion in the dancing that really clicked with me. There was something there that has always stayed with me. And later, so I think I was like 9 or 10 then, and later around when I was 14 or 15 in my Dutch school, we went to a cinema, an art cinema, that was for me for the first time, and we saw Being John Malkovich. And this was for me a movie that really opened my mind in showing that a story can also be told in non-conventional ways, like in ways that were maybe strange, but because of the strangeness they had extra impact. I think what always stayed with me is the playing with conventional methods in relation to exploring non-conventional methods for storytelling or for organizing materials. So yeah, this balance of conventional and non-conventional means to create a story that I think matters. That's a recurring thing, yeah. From 8 on, I already started playing keyboard and making my own synths, and I had like a whole advanced keyboard system at home as a toy basically, but that was always like something I do for distractions or for fun or for explorations. I think the decision of knowing I can become an artist, like a professional artist, came even after my university degree. So I was like 22 or 23 when I made the conscious decision, okay, now I did all of this stuff and now I will become an artist. It came quite late for me. Back then I was studying psychology in the University of Amsterdam, and I was at the point where I was having to decide for what kind of masters to do, and I was finishing up my Bachelor of Science, and at the same time I was always playing in bands, I was always making music, and around that period I was making music for short films with friends and making music for some short dance pieces. And then I thought, well, maybe it is possible to not only be a musician as a performer, but also a musician as a composer behind the screen. I don't know how you say it. So in the shadows, basically, on the background, adding music to an already existing or soon to be existing piece of art. So there's things that are recurring and there's things that are different every time. One of the things that almost always happens in my creative processes is that I think a lot first about what it's going to mean, or what are the semantics of this piece. What am I trying to tell? What am I trying to bring across? And how I play with the conventional methods and the non-conventional methods is also a recurring thing there. What is different is the type of material that I use for it. So one time it will become more textural, more noisy, more abstract. Another time it becomes more poppy, depending on what kind of concepts are behind it. So that changes. One of the things that very often happens in my exploration of the aesthetic is improvisation. I improvise a lot in keys or with synths or by singing, sometimes just in imagination. When I'm trying to put things together in my mind before putting them on paper. It's also a form of improvisation, basically. I'm kind of testing colors and patterns. And what is different every time is that I start very often with a clean sheet. So I create the synths for every project from scratch. I don't use presets. I really just start from the beginning and start building the sounds. When I need to decide when a piece is finished, I go back to my conceptual ideas to think of, okay, do I now have the right elements to build this piece with? And then I start, well, improvising again with the building blocks that I have created to try which order fits better. And after, well, now about 20 years of composing, at some point I can kind of imagine which parts or which orders will work better than others in their dramaturgy, let's say. When I place all the elements together, I put them on a timeline, and sometimes it's with music notation, sometimes it's audio files in a sequencer. It really depends. And at some point, it's just a conscious decision. At some point I have to decide, now it's finished. It's not really, I'm not aware of a specific reflection I do per project. It feels like at some point I just know it's done. Sometimes it's also just time. So, for example, I have deadlines for delivering the score. At some point, well, I mean, yes, I could have still worked on it for a couple of weeks, but at some point it's just, you have to just say, now it's done. And then kind of dive into the deep and figure it out afterwards. Those creative blocks are always existing, like in minor or major forms, but for me, very often when I notice I don't feel the motivation or that I don't know where something should go, I either pause that element and continue with something else, so that I keep going, because if I get stuck and I focus on not getting stuck, then nothing happens. And if I just pause that, I trust myself to figure it out later. And sometimes by continuing elsewhere, for example, I'm trying to make a climax here, but I don't know how to achieve it, I pause it and then continue with a softer element in a different part or somewhere else on the timeline. And sometimes by doing that other work, I generate ideas for how to fix the first problem. So I basically keep busy and don't focus too much on the thing that doesn't work, and I try to work on the things that do work. And that seems to be working, so. It's always difficult to think of the one artist that inspires me. There's always like multiple people throughout my entire life. Everything that I experience, of course, inspires me directly or indirectly, but there have been definitely some specific artists. And the first person that comes to mind is John Cage, a composer, a writer, a philosopher, gardener, a thinker, lots of things he was. And one of the main things that he inspired me in is, again, what I said earlier about the use of non-conventional methods, of non-musical musicality, basically. So everyday sounds as music. I think the emancipation of sound, he was a big person, or big force there to emancipate everyday sounds and to use them musically. So that's on the one side, and on the other side also his ways of indeterminacy. So having certain ideas and then letting the musicians solve it in the moment, or the dancers or the painters, depending on who he was working with. So this intrinsic interdisciplinary approach to, he's a composer, but he was not the main thing. It was about the interaction with the other performers. And this is something that's actually always stuck with me. And of course, I'm finding my own ways also in the synthesizers and the programs and the instruments that I create. I almost always have a form of indeterminacy in there, so that I can also keep a fresh relationship to the material. So every moment that I'm performing, the material sounds different, and that way I keep exploring even in the moment. But the same goes for working with musicians. I really see them as interpreters of my ideas, not just executors of my ideas. So an interpreter, I think, cares maybe less about accuracy and more about the meaning of the material. So about the expressiveness. And of course now I'm making it very black and white. It's not that divided. But yeah, for me they are kind of like archetypical forms of being a musician. And I prefer to work more with interpreters than with executors, also because I'm myself more that type of musician. And yeah, the expression is the main thing for me in music. Pay to Destroy is an activistic concert piece where the interaction with the audience actually influences how the music is sounding. The audience throughout the piece has 8 moments where they can place a vote, and the averages of those votes result into a certain level of pollution of the music. Because Pay to Destroy covers the themes of how we relate ourselves as consumers towards the health of our planet. So what are we doing as a consumer, as a person living in this economic system, and how do those choices influence our surroundings? And all the questions that I'm asking, the voting sessions that I'm asking of the audience are related to those topics. So they constantly have to choose between what seems to be their personal comfort versus the health of our planet. And those two, kind of forces that are not really in line with each other are both in the semantics of the piece, but also in the aesthetics of the piece. I try to really put things under pressure, basically. So what is new to me in this creative process is the inclusion of audience participation. Normally, I'm actually not in favor of that myself, because as an audience member, I just want to experience what they have prepared. But in this case, I found it important to not only engage the audience intellectually and emotionally through the music, but also engage them even more directly by actually having their choices audibly change the music. And of course, they don't know exactly what changes, but there's going to be changes occurring, and the piece is actually getting destroyed and more polluted as we go on. And I tried in this piece to make a more direct link between the individual choice of the voting and the direct consequence of what's happening, because in real life we don't really see those consequences so clearly and directly. It's more, it feels outside of us, even though that's not the case. So through this piece I try to make that link more tangible. This has been quite a challenge in finding a right model, finding a right way of what is it that the audience can influence and what is it that the audience cannot influence. Because at first I was exploring in the creative process with ideas of maybe having a non-linear piece where certain segments are pre-composed that kind of resemble a certain stage of pollution. And I tried some of that, but I was not really happy with the inflexibility of the system, because then the score would be very flexible, but I was wondering if the audience recognition of that flexibility would really resemble their choices. So what I ended up with is a system where the score itself, the music score itself, is kind of like a skeleton of the piece, with all the materials, all the harmonies, textures, rhythms, everything is there, the narration. And what changes is how the musicians interpret it. For example, if we are in I made 11 different stages of pollution. So a stage of pollution, stage of corruption, destruction, devastation, well, there's a whole list. And depending on in which stage we have arrived through the voting, the musicians have different parameters to change. So for example, in stage of destruction, they are asked to bend the notes a bit more, so the harmonies become more unstable. In other stages, they are asked to make the sustain of a note less stable, so to have more kind of audible glitches sounding. So it's more in how the material gets executed that changes based on the voting system. And I think this is important for me, that the audience has this influence, because then for some people it will be a playful thing, like, oh, I can interact with the music, how fun, oh, I'm just gonna press the destroy option, I think. But what I do is So this is the first time that well, not the first time, but one of the big projects where I managed to put my activism in my art as well. Very often those two were different forces inside of me and usually don't coincide. But by having this interaction with the audience, I hope their thoughts will be provoked. There's a narration part in the piece as well, so there's spoken words that are kind of disembodied and guide the audience through the process of the piece with the voting, but also in relation to my intrusive thoughts that occur with these dilemmas. And also some almost like a documentary info dumps. There's information being sent to the audience as well that might influence their voting. And often it happens after the voting as a reflection of what they just decided to do. And throughout the piece, the prompts for the voting become more abstract. So in the beginning, they're very tangible, like, do you take a plane or do you take a train? It's quite obvious, I think, for most people, which of the two options is more polluting. And later on, it becomes more unclear, more ambiguous. And that ambiguity, for me, is kind of like a weapon of choice, you could say, to challenge their thoughts and challenge their behaviors and choices. So through the voting, because they have already been voting for like half an hour, then I confront them with the ambiguity, and I hope that that kind of helps them reflect like, okay, but which one is actually better then? And if I manage to have them have that question linger in their minds more often than now, then I think I have achieved at least one of my activistic goals. So this is a piece that the concepts or the starting ideas already started around 2021, like in the pandemic. I was trying to find ways to keep making music, and that's kind of when the ideas for Pray to Destroy started. And there were then years of trying for funding and applying for funding, and in total there have been like 17 rejections. So boredom was not really a problem, but the engagement was definitely an issue there, because at some point, it's not that I started doubting about the value of this project. I just started doubting whether the cultural system would want to fund such a project. So maybe it was not the right time, maybe it was not the right place. So those were thoughts that kept recurring, and there were multiple moments where I felt like, yeah, I don't know, I tried so many times with so many different agencies, with different people that are experienced fundraisers. And yeah, there were moments where I wanted to give up multiple times. And then at some point, Eze caught on to this process and this project, and he was very excited about my ideas and plans, and then we tried together with Modelo, and then also a couple of rejections first followed. But what was really nice is that in the stage where I was like, yeah, I really tried, like 3 or 4 years. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And there was a certain acceptance. But then the Modelo, the ensemble actually had such renewed energy of, no, but we want to do this, we're going to do this. So they kind of did a crossfade with my demotivation. They became more motivated, and then we kept on trying until we succeeded. Yeah. So then when it finally was clear that the project was going to happen, in November, past November, I just sat down and started working. So I worked out the score for about 2 months. I was working out my concepts and my musical ideas, and then we had a first workshop, like a first reading through session with a part of the ensemble. It was not the full group, just to try out some of the ideas, and also like the prototype of this modification table that I created for the interpretation levels. And that was very revealing, like which parts do work, which ideas don't work. And then I went back for another, I think, month and a half of composing, taking all of those reflections, and I updated the score. And then we had a second workshop. And then I ended with about 2 months of finishing up the score from beginning to the end in 3 acts, finishing up the modification table, because every time I discovered new things of what is over asking the musicians and what is asking enough because they're already reading the score and they're already applying all of those different effects, and they have to be aware of the stage of pollution. So it's a lot of complex layers on top of each other. So then about 4.5 months have passed. I delivered the score, and now the past week we have been rehearsing daily, where we've been just going through the score and fixing where necessary, and just either in the execution or in the score itself. It's been a very interactive, creative process. Normally, when I work with more conventional means, and I have to kind of prepare and imagine all sounding developments, and I put them all in the score, normally then it becomes very rigid, and this is basically the piece and we're just gonna execute it, basically. But in this case, I'm asking the musicians to do a lot of different interpretations of the materials that I prepared. So naturally the piece will sound different every time, because there's a certain amount of indeterminacy to the outcomes of the notes that I wrote. And this means that we also have to find balances during the rehearsals. And there it was a constant dialogue with Eze and the conductor and the other musicians to find the right balances there. So there have been quite some, I would say, detailed changes. So the macro structure is still there, and the transitions are there, and the rhythmical materials and the harmonies, all of that is still there, but sometimes we notice that certain harmonies need a little bit more low, for example, or a little bit more high, or a certain rhythm needs to slow down before we continue. So those kind of details that we fix in the rehearsals. Yeah. The past 10 years or so, I've been working with my custom-made instrument, Gest. It's a super collider patch with an Arduino and some light sensors, which allows me to have quite, for me, intuitive hand gestures, and with that I can create the music live in the moment. This is something that I've been doing for different projects the past 10 years, and this is for the first time that I use Gest as an instrument in an ensemble. So normally it's been a solo instrument or tool for a creative process, for like a dance performance or something, for recording basically, and now it's been also a live instrument for a couple of projects, but now for the first time as part of the ensemble. My original idea was to find a more intuitive way of making music, electronic music, because electronic music very often requires knobs and faders like this, which is not bad, but for me that was not a very intuitive thing. Also, if I do this, it doesn't communicate so much visually to the audience, but if I do that, the gesture and the sound have more resemblance. And that direct communication for me is really important as a performer, but I think also as an audience. You don't have to understand exactly what is going on, but you see me do this and you hear something change clearly. And then I can also be more expressive by moving through the filter. So I can very easily make morphs. And again, it's not about, because there's a whole technical story I can tell, but it's just about seeing something and hearing something that coexists. I think what the audience will enjoy during the concert is the interactions between the musical narrative and the spoken narrative. So there's a lot of interactions going there. There's three kind of disembodied speakers, the voting guide, my personal thoughts, and the kind of documentary style information dumps. And those all show a different perspective of this situation that we are in, and the music also is itself a different perspective again there. So I think having all of those perspectives together create different points of interest where an audience member can resonate with what is either being spoken or not being said, or what is sounding in the musical materials. So I think what they would enjoy is the layers of different perspectives. At least that's what I hope.